In the quiet, forgotten corners of Earth's frontier, where the land stretched wide and untamed, there was a small settlement called Willow Creek. It wasn't much to look at, just a cluster of wooden houses, a few farms, and a single dirt road that wound through the hills. The people who lived there weren't wealthy or famous. They were ordinary folks, trying to make a living far from the noise and chaos of the big cities. There were farmers planting crops, mechanics fixing old machines, teachers running a tiny schoolhouse, and families raising children in peace. Life in Willow Creek was simple, predictable, and safe, or so everyone thought. Daniel Carter was one of those ordinary people. He had once been a soldier, trained to fight and protect, but now he spent his days tending to fields of corn and wheat. His hands, calloused from years of hard work, held tools instead of weapons. Daniel's wife, Laura, ran the town's only clinic. She wasn't a doctor by training, but she knew enough to patch up cuts, set broken bones, and comfort those who needed it most. Together, they were pillars of the community, respected and loved by everyone in Willow Creek. The town didn't have walls or guards. It didn't need them. For as long as anyone could remember, nothing bad had ever happened here. No wars reached this part of the world, no storms destroyed the crops, and no strangers came knocking with ill intentions. To outsiders, Willow Creek might have seemed weak, unprotected, and easy to take advantage of. But what outsiders didn't know, and what even the townsfolk barely realized, was that beneath its calm surface, Willow Creek had secrets. Secrets that would soon change everything. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the jagged mountains, casting long shadows over the fields, something unusual happened. The sky, which had been clear and bright all day, suddenly darkened. At first, the townspeople thought it was just clouds rolling in, but then they saw it. A strange light moving across the heavens. It wasn't like anything they'd ever seen before. The light grew brighter and larger until it became clear that it wasn't a star or a plane. It was a ship, enormous and sleek, descending silently toward the ground. People stopped what they were doing to watch. Children froze in their games, pointing upward. Farmers leaned on their shovels, squinting into the distance. Even Daniel paused, in the middle of fixing a fence, his heart pounding as he stared at the alien vessel. The ship hovered above the town for a moment, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Then, without warning, a voice boomed through the air, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Attention, humans of Willow Creek," the voice said. It wasn't human. It was cold, mechanical, and devoid of emotion. "You are now under the control of the Krylos Empire. Surrender immediately or face annihilation." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He recognized the name, the Krylos Empire. Everyone did. They were a powerful alien race known for conquering weaker planets and enslaving their populations. Stories about them had spread across Earth for years, usually dismissed as rumors or exaggerations. But standing there, watching that massive ship block out the stars, Daniel knew the truth. The Krylos were real, and they had come to Willow Creek. Panic spread quickly through the town. Some people screamed and ran for cover. Others stood frozen, too shocked to move. Laura rushed out of the clinic, her eyes wide with fear. "Daniel," she called, grabbing his arm. "What do we do?" For a moment, Daniel didn't answer. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he couldn't lie. How could a place like Willow Creek possibly stand against an alien empire? They had no weapons, no army, no way to fight back. All they had was each other, and maybe that wasn't enough. But then, deep in his mind, a spark of hope flickered. Daniel remembered something important. Months ago, he and a few others in the town had intercepted strange signals coming from space. At the time, they hadn't understood what the signals meant, but they had prepared for the worst. With the help of Maria Lopez, a programmer who had moved to Willow Creek seeking peace, they had built a defense system unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was hidden beneath the town square, buried deep underground where no one would find it unless they knew exactly where to look. "Get everyone to the tunnels," Daniel said finally, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Now." Laura, nodded, and hurried off to spread the word. Daniel grabbed his wrench and headed toward the center of town. As he walked, he noticed how eerily quiet everything had become. The streets, usually bustling with activity, were empty. Doors were left open, toys abandoned in the dirt. It was as if the entire town had vanished into thin air. When Daniel reached the town square, he found Maria already there, typing furiously on a laptop connected to a series of wires snaking into the ground. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her glasses reflected the glow of the screen. "I've activated the drones," she said without looking up. "They're ready to go." "Good," Daniel replied. "Let's hope they're enough." As if on cue, the sound of engines filled the air. Dozens of smaller ships detached from the mothership, descending rapidly toward the ground. Moments later, armored figures emerged, Krylos soldiers, tall and imposing, their weapons gleaming in the fading light. They moved with precision, scanning the area for signs of life. Their leader, a towering figure with a helmet adorned with glowing red markings, barked orders in a language none of the humans could understand. Daniel watched from the shadows, gripping his wrench tightly. He knew the next few minutes would decide the fate of Willow Creek. If their plan worked, they might stand a chance. If it didn't, well, he didn't want to think about that. The Krylos soldiers fanned out, searching every building and alleyway. They expected to find terrified humans begging for mercy. What they didn't expect was silence. The town was eerily still, almost as if it had been abandoned years ago. Confused but undeterred, the soldiers continued their search, unaware that they were walking straight into a trap. Beneath the town square, Maria finished her preparations. "It's done," she said, closing the laptop. "All we can do now is wait." Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. "Let's hope we're ready for this." Above ground, the Krylos soldiers gathered in the center of the square, their leader surveying the area with growing impatience. Where were the humans? Why hadn't they surrendered yet? Just as he opened his mouth to issue another command, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. Suddenly, hatches opened in the pavement, revealing rows of sleek, spider-like drones armed with plasma cannons. Before the Krylos could react, the drones sprang to life, unleashing a barrage of precise fire. Simultaneously, EMP emitters hidden throughout the town activated, disabling the invaders' energy shields and communication systems. Chaos erupted as the once confident Krylos soldiers found themselves cut off and vulnerable to attack. Back in the tunnels, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. The battle had begun, and for the first time since the alien ship appeared, he felt a glimmer of hope. Willow Creek might not have armies or advanced technology, but it had something far more valuable: determination. And sometimes that was enough to overcome even the greatest odds. As the sounds of battle echoed through the tunnels, Daniel turned to Maria. "How long do you think we can hold them off?" Maria shrugged, her expression grim. "Long enough, I hope. Long enough to survive. Long enough to fight back. And long enough to prove that even the smallest settlements on Earth weren't as weak as they seemed." The Krylos soldiers had expected an easy victory. They had faced countless settlements like Willow Creek before, primitive, defenseless, and quick to surrender. But as the first wave of drones erupted from beneath the ground, their confidence began to crack. The sleek, spider-like machines moved with terrifying speed, firing plasma bolts with pinpoint accuracy. Each shot targeted the Krylos weapons or equipment, disabling them without causing unnecessary harm to the soldiers themselves. Commander Vrax, the leader of the invasion force, stood frozen for a split second, his glowing red visor scanning the chaos around him. His troops were scattering, shouting in confusion as their energy shields flickered and died. The EMP emitters hidden throughout the town had done their job well, cutting off communication between the soldiers and rendering their advanced technology useless. For the first time in his long career, Vrax felt a pang of doubt. What kind of primitive settlement could pull off something like this? Beneath the town square, Daniel Carter watched the battle unfold on a small monitor connected to Maria Lopez's laptop. The screen showed live footage from cameras positioned around Willow Creek, giving them a clear view of the Krylos's every move. Daniel clenched his fists, his knuckles white as he observed the chaos above. "How are they holding up?" he asked, glancing at Maria. "They're doing fine, for now," Maria replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She adjusted the drone's targeting systems, ensuring they stayed focused on disarming the invaders rather than killing them. "But we can't keep this up forever. Sooner or later they'll figure out where the drones are coming from." Daniel nodded grimly. He knew she was right. Their plan relied on surprise and precision, but surprises didn't last long in a fight like this. Once the Krylos realized the source of the attack, they would strike back with everything they had. And when that happened, Willow Creek's defenses might not be enough. Meanwhile, Laura Carter worked tirelessly in the clinic basement, which had been converted into a makeshift command center. She monitored surveillance feeds and relayed critical information to Daniel and Maria via a handheld radio. Her voice remained calm despite the tension in the air. "The Krylos are regrouping near the schoolhouse," she reported. "Looks like they're trying to form a counterattack." "Got it," Daniel said. He turned to Ethan Brooks, a former security guard who had volunteered to help coordinate the operation. "Ethan, redirect 3 drones to the schoolhouse. Keep them pinned down." Ethan nodded and tapped commands into his tablet. Moments later, the designated drones shifted their positions, converging on the schoolhouse and forcing the Krylos soldiers to retreat further into the open. The aliens fired wildly, their shots missing their targets as the drones darted around them with impossible agility. Above ground, Sarah Bennett crouched behind a stack of crates near the edge of town, her rifle trained on the invaders. She wasn't part of the original plan, but when the fighting started, she had taken it upon herself to join the effort. Beside her was Jake Miller, a mechanic who had retrofitted several old-fashioned ballistic turrets with high-explosive rounds. Together, they formed a secondary line of defense, ready to spring into action if the Krylos broke through the drones. Sarah's sharp eyes scanned the battlefield, searching for opportunities to pick off key targets. When she spotted a group of Krylos attempting to flank the drones, she steadied her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck its mark, disabling one soldier's weapon and sending the others scrambling for cover. Jake grinned at her from behind the crates. "Nice shot," he muttered. "Thanks," Sarah replied, reloading her rifle. "Let's just hope it's enough." Back underground, Maria noticed something alarming on her screen. "They're deploying reinforcements," she said, pointing to a cluster of new signals appearing on the radar. "Looks like shock troopers, elite units with anti-drone gear." Daniel cursed under his breath. This was exactly what he had feared. The Krylos weren't going to give up easily, and their elite forces would pose a much greater threat than the regular soldiers. "We need to adapt," he said, thinking quickly. "Maria, can you reprogram the drones to prioritize those shock troopers?" "I'll try," Maria replied, already typing furiously. "But it's going to take a few minutes. These things weren't designed to handle specialized enemies." "We don't have a few minutes," Daniel snapped, his frustration boiling over. Then, forcing himself to calm down, he added, "Do your best. We'll hold them off as long as we can." As Maria worked, Daniel turned his attention to the monitors again. The shock troopers were advancing steadily, their movements precise and coordinated. Unlike the regular soldiers, they seemed unfazed by the EMP effects, their suits equipped with shielding that resisted electronic interference. Worse still, they carried weapons specifically designed to disable drones. One by one, the machines fell, their circuits fried by concentrated bursts of energy. The situation was growing desperate. Without the drones, Willow Creek's primary line of defense would collapse, leaving the townsfolk exposed to the full force of the Krylos assault. Daniel knew he had to act fast. Grabbing a nearby map of the town, he studied it intently, looking for any advantage they could exploit. His eyes landed on the old water tower perched on a hill overlooking the settlement. It wasn't much, but it offered a vantage point and a potential weak spot in the Krylos' strategy. "Ethan," Daniel said, turning to the former security guard, "I need you to head to the water tower. Take some explosives with you and rig it to blow. If we Time it right, we can use it to funnel the shock troopers into a kill zone. Ethan hesitated for a moment, clearly uneasy about leaving the safety of the tunnels. But then he nodded, grabbing a backpack filled with charges and heading for the exit. Be careful, Daniel called after him. Once Ethan was gone, Daniel focused on rallying the remaining defenders. Over the radio, he instructed Sarah and Jake to fall back to the tree line surrounding the town, where they could set up ambush points using the retrofitted turrets. Meanwhile, Laura continued to monitor the situation from the clinic, keeping track of enemy movements and relaying updates to the team. Above ground, the battle raged on. The shock troopers pressed forward, systematically dismantling the drone network while fending off sporadic attacks from Sarah and Jake. Despite their superior training and equipment, however, they were beginning to show signs of strain. The unexpected resistance had thrown them off balance, and their usual tactics weren't working as effectively as they should. In the tunnels, Maria finally managed to reprogram the remaining drones, prioritizing the shock troopers and adjusting their attack patterns to compensate for the anti-drone weaponry. It's done, she announced, wiping sweat from her brow. Let's see how they handle this. On the monitors, the drones surged forward, swarming the shock troopers with renewed aggression. Though several more machines were destroyed, the increased pressure forced the Krylos to slow their advance. For the first time since the reinforcements arrived, the tide of the battle began to shift slightly in Willow Creek's favor. But Daniel knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The Krylos still outnumbered them, and their resources were dwindling. Every second counted, and even the smallest mistake could cost them everything. Up on the hill, Ethan reached the water tower and set to work planting the explosives. As he secured the charges, he glanced down at the town below, watching the flashes of light and hearing the distant echoes of gunfire. He couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Willow Creek might have been small and unassuming, but its people had proven themselves capable of standing up to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. When the explosives were ready, Ethan radioed Daniel. "I'm in position," he said. "Waiting for your signal." "Hold tight," Daniel replied. "We'll let you know when to detonate." As the fighting dragged on, the townsfolk clung to hope, knowing that their survival depended on staying united and resourceful. They had faced overwhelming odds before, not as individuals but as a community, and they had always found a way to persevere. This time would be no different. With the battle hanging in the balance, Daniel made a decision. "Maria," he said, his voice firm, "activate the final protocol." Maria looked at him, her eyes wide. "Are you sure? That's our last line of defense." "I'm sure," Daniel said. "We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count." Maria nodded and entered the final command into her laptop. Deep beneath the town square, hidden generators roared to life, powering up a massive electromagnetic pulse device. When triggered, it would disable all Krylos technology within a 5-mile radius, including their weapons, armor, and communication systems. But there was a catch. The EMP would also knock out Willow Creek's own defenses, leaving the town vulnerable if the Krylos managed to recover quickly. It was a risky move, but Daniel believed it was their only chance. As the EMP charged, the defenders braced themselves for what was to come. Above ground, the Krylos soldiers continued their relentless assault, unaware of the storm about to break over them. Beneath the surface, Daniel, Maria, and the others held their breath, waiting for the moment when everything would change. And then, with a deafening roar, the EMP detonated. The electromagnetic pulse surged through Willow Creek like a silent storm, invisible yet devastating. For a brief moment, everything went dark. Lights flickered off, machines sputtered to a halt, and the hum of technology faded into an eerie silence. Then, as the EMP's effects spread outward, the Krylos soldiers froze mid-step, their weapons falling from suddenly powerless hands. Their sleek armor, once gleaming with energy, dimmed and became dead weight. Even their glowing helmets lost their menacing red glow, leaving them blind and disoriented. Above ground, Sarah Bennett lowered her rifle and stared in awe at the scene unfolding before her. The Krylos shock troopers, who had been advancing steadily just moments ago, now stumbled around aimlessly, shouting in frustration, Without their advanced gear, they were nothing more than heavily armored figures struggling to adapt to the sudden loss of their technological edge. Beside her, Jake Miller let out a low whistle. "That was intense," he muttered, adjusting his grip on the turret controls. In the tunnels beneath the town square, Daniel Carter exhaled sharply, relief washing over him, but only for a moment. He knew the EMP wouldn't last forever. Once the Krylos recovered, they would retaliate with even greater ferocity. Time was still against them. "Maria," he said, turning to the programmer, "how long until their systems reboot?" "Hard to say," Maria replied, typing furiously on her laptop. "Their tech is advanced. Could be minutes, could be hours. Either way, we need to hit them hard while they're vulnerable." Daniel nodded grimly. "Sarah, Jake, keep pushing them back toward the water tower. Ethan, you ready up there?" Ethan's voice crackled over the radio. "Ready when you are," he said, his tone steady despite the chaos around him. "Good. Wait for my signal." As the defenders regrouped, the Krylos began to realize what had happened. Commander Vrax, his helmet now lifeless and dull, barked orders to his troops, though his voice carried less authority without the amplification of his suit. The aliens scrambled to form a defensive perimeter, relying on brute force instead of technology. Some pulled out primitive melee weapons stored in hidden compartments within their armor, while others resorted to using their fists and sheer physical strength. But Willow Creek's defenders weren't about to give them time to recover. Sarah and Jake moved swiftly, positioning themselves behind the retrofitted turrets near the tree line. With precise aim, they unleashed a barrage of high-explosive rounds, targeting clusters of Krylos soldiers and forcing them to retreat further, into the open. Each explosion sent shockwaves through the air, scattering debris and sending the invaders scrambling for cover. Meanwhile, Daniel coordinated the remaining drones, which had survived the EMP thanks to shielding Maria had installed during their preparation months earlier. Though fewer in number, the drones darted around the battlefield, harassing the Krylos and keeping them off balance. "Focus on the leaders," Daniel instructed Maria, pointing to a group of soldiers who appeared to be organizing a counterattack. "Take them out and the rest will fall apart." Maria nodded and adjusted the drone's programming accordingly. Within seconds, the machine zeroed in on the targeted Krylos, firing bursts of plasma that forced them to abandon their positions. Chaos reigned as the invaders struggled to regain control of the situation, their usual discipline crumbling under the relentless assault. Up on the hill, Ethan watched the battle unfold from his vantage point near the water tower. His hands hovered over the detonator, waiting for Daniel's command. Below him, the Krylos were being funneled exactly where they wanted them, into the narrow stretch of land between the trees and the base of the hill. It was a perfect kill zone, one that would maximize the damage caused by the explosives planted on the water tower. "Almost there," Ethan muttered to himself, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of trouble. He spotted a small group of Krylos attempting to flank the defenders by moving through the dense forest. Quickly, he radioed Daniel. "Got movement on the left flank. Looks like they're trying to sneak around." "Copy that," Daniel replied. "Jake, Sarah, watch. You're 6, don't let them get behind you." "Roger," Sarah said, shifting her position slightly to cover the new threat. She fired a few warning shots, forcing the flanking Krylos to retreat back into the open. Jake adjusted the angle of the turret, ensuring it covered the gap she had left. Back underground, Laura monitored the situation from the clinic basement, her face pale but determined. She relayed updates to the team via the handheld radio, her voice calm and steady despite the tension in the air. "They're retreating toward the water tower," she reported. "Looks like your plan is working." "Not yet," Daniel said, his jaw clenched. "We're not done." Finally, the moment came. The Krylos forces were packed tightly together at the base of the hill, trapped between the drones above, the turrets below, and the water tower looming overhead. Daniel gave the order. "Ethan, blow it." Without hesitation, Ethan pressed the detonator. There was a deafening roar as the explosives ignited, sending the massive water tower crashing down onto the unsuspecting Krylos. The impact shook the ground, throwing dirt and metal shards in every direction. When the dust settled, dozens of Alien soldiers lay buried beneath the wreckage, their advance completely halted. For a brief moment, the battlefield fell silent. The surviving Krylos staggered backward, their confidence shattered. They had come expecting an easy victory, but instead they found themselves facing an enemy who refused to give up. Commander Vrax, bloodied and battered, shouted orders to his remaining troops, but his words lacked conviction. Even he could see that the tide had turned decisively against them. Seizing the opportunity, Sarah and Jake launched another wave of attacks, picking off isolated Krylos soldiers one by one. The drones continued to harass the invaders, darting in and out of view like angry hornets. Above ground, the townsfolk who had been hiding in the tunnels began to emerge cautiously, armed with whatever makeshift weapons they could find: pitchforks, shovels, even kitchen knives. Together, they formed a ragtag militia, determined to drive the invaders out of their home. Daniel climbed out of the tunnels and surveyed the scene. The Krylos were beaten, their numbers reduced to a fraction of what they had been when they first landed. But he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. As long as even one soldier remained standing, the fight wasn't over. "Maria," he said into his radio. "Status update? The EMP is wearing off," Maria replied. "Their systems are starting to come back online. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they can use their weapons again." 5 minutes, Daniel repeated, his mind racing. "That's all we need." He turned to the defenders gathered around him. "Listen up," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "We've pushed them this far, but they're not gone yet. If we want to finish this, we have to hit them with everything we've got. No holding back, understand?" A chorus of nods and murmurs of agreement answered him. The townsfolk tightened their grips on their weapons, their faces set with determination. They might not have been soldiers, but they were fighters now, united by a common cause. With renewed energy, the defenders launched a final push. Sarah and Jake led the charge, their turrets roaring to life as they advanced on the remaining Krylos. The drones swarmed overhead, delivering precise strikes that kept the aliens pinned down. Behind them, the townsfolk followed, closing the distance with shouts of defiance. Commander Vrax tried to rally his troops, but it was no use. Morale had collapsed, and the survivors were too busy trying to save themselves to listen to his commands. One by one, they surrendered, dropping their weapons and raising their hands in defeat. By the time the 5th minute passed, the battle was over. The Krylos invasion force had been utterly defeated. Breathing heavily, Daniel looked around at the aftermath. The town square was littered with debris, smoke hung thick in the air, and the smell of burnt metal filled his nostrils. But Willow Creek still stood, battered but unbroken. The townsfolk cheered, hugging each other and exchanging relieved smiles. For the first time in hours, hope replaced fear. Laura approached Daniel, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "We did it," she said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "We actually did it." Daniel nodded, pulling her into a hug. "Yeah, we did. But this isn't the end. The Krylos won't forget this. They'll be back, and next time we might not be so lucky." Laura frowned. "What do we do then?" "We prepare," Daniel said firmly. "We rebuild, we learn, and we get stronger. Because if there's one thing today proved, it's that we're tougher than anyone gives us credit for." As the sun rose over Willow Creek, casting golden light over the damaged but defiant settlement, the townsfolk began the long process of cleaning up and healing. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, not because they had superior weapons or training, but because they had stood together, and as long as they stayed united, they knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Far above, the remnants of the Krylos fleet retreated into the void, their mission a failure. But somewhere in the darkness of space, plans were already being made. Willow Creek had proven itself a formidable opponent, and the Empire would not take such humiliation lightly. The battle might have ended, but the war was just beginning. The victory at Willow Creek was sweet, but it didn't last long. As the townsfolk worked to clean up the wreckage and tend to the injured, a sense of unease lingered in the air. The Krylos fleet had retreated, disappearing into the vastness of space. But everyone knew they wouldn't stay gone forever. Commander Vrax's failure would not be taken lightly by the Krylos Empire. Retribution was inevitable. Daniel Carter stood near the edge of town, staring at the horizon where the alien ship had vanished. His hands were still dirty from the battle, and his body ached from exhaustion, but he couldn't rest. There was too much to do, too much to prepare for. "They'll come back," he said aloud, though no one else was nearby. It wasn't a question. It was a certainty. Maria Lopez joined him a few moments later, her laptop tucked under one arm. She looked as tired as Daniel felt, her dark hair messy, and her glasses slightly askew. "You're probably right," she said, following his gaze. "But we've got time. Not much, but enough to make sure we're ready." Daniel nodded. "We need to figure out what went wrong today, what almost cost us everything." Maria frowned. "What do you mean? We won, didn't we?" "Barely," Daniel replied. "If Ethan hadn't blown that water tower when he did, if the EMP hadn't worked exactly the way it was supposed to, we'd be dead right now. Next time we might not get so lucky." Maria sighed, knowing he was right. The battle had been a desperate scramble relying on surprise and improvisation. Against a more prepared enemy or a larger force, they wouldn't stand a chance. "So what's the plan?" she asked. "We upgrade," Daniel said firmly. "Everything. Drones, turrets, defenses. And we don't just rely on tech this time. We train people, teach them how to fight, how to survive. If we want to hold our ground, we need to be stronger next time." Maria nodded, already mentally cataloging the improvements they could make. "I'll start working on better shielding for the drones. Maybe add some AI upgrades to make them smarter. But that's going to take resources we don't have." "We'll find a way," Daniel said. "We always do." Over the next few days, life in Willow Creek slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an event. The townsfolk worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the battle. Broken windows were replaced, burned fields were replanted, and makeshift barricades were dismantled. Laura Carter spent long hours in the clinic, treating cuts, bruises, and burns. Though no one had been killed during the attack, many had been injured, and the emotional toll was heavy. Despite the hard work, there was a new energy in the air. People who had once thought of themselves as ordinary farmers or shopkeepers now saw themselves as survivors. They had faced an alien invasion and lived to tell the tale. That knowledge gave them courage and determination. Ethan Brooks became something of a local hero after his role in bringing down the water tower. He spent his days helping Jake Miller reinforce the defenses around the town. Together, they modified old vehicles into mobile weapon platforms and rigged abandoned buildings with traps and alarms. "If they come back, we'll be ready," Ethan said confidently, though deep down he wasn't so sure. Sarah Bennett, meanwhile, organized training sessions for anyone willing to learn how to use a gun. She set up targets in an open field and patiently taught volunteers how to aim, shoot, and reload. At first, many of the townsfolk struggled. Some had never even held a weapon before, but Sarah refused to give up on them. "You don't have to be perfect," she told them. "Just good enough to stay alive." Laura watched all of this with pride but also concern. Her husband, Daniel, barely slept, spending most of his time coordinating efforts with Maria and planning for the future. When she finally managed to corner him one evening, she confronted him about it. "You're running yourself ragged," she said gently. "You can't keep going like this." "I don't have a choice," Daniel replied, rubbing his temples. "If I stop, even for a second, we're all in danger." "You're no good to anyone if you collapse," Laura countered. "Take a break. Just for tonight." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. But even as he lay in bed, his mind raced with thoughts of the Krylos and what their return might mean. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Meanwhile, Maria made significant progress on upgrading the defense systems. Using data recovered from the Krylos equipment, she reverse-engineered parts of their technology and incorporated it into Willow Creek's own arsenal. The drones became faster, smarter, and more durable. The EMP device was reconfigured to cover a wider area, and Maria even managed to build a rudimentary early warning system to detect incoming ships. But as she worked, she couldn't help but think about the bigger picture. Willow Creek might have survived this battle, but Earth itself was still vulnerable. The Krylus Empire spanned countless star systems, and humanity was nothing more than a speck on their radar. If they decided to invade in full force, no amount of preparation would save them. One night, as she sat hunched over her laptop in the dim light of the tunnels, Daniel walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her one. "Thanks," Maria replied, taking a sip. "I needed it." "How's it coming along?" Daniel asked, nodding toward the screen. "Good," Maria said. "Better than I expected, actually. But what?" Maria hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Do you ever wonder if we're fighting a losing battle? I mean, look at us. We're a tiny settlement in the middle of nowhere. What happens when the Krylos send a real army? Or worse, when they decide to bomb us from orbit?" Daniel sighed. He had asked himself the same question 100 times. "I don't know," he admitted. "All I know is that giving up isn't an option. If we can hold them off long enough, maybe someone will notice. Maybe other settlements will start preparing too. Maybe, I don't know. Something will change." Maria nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "Let's hope so." As the weeks passed, Willow Creek transformed. What had once been a quiet, unassuming settlement now resembled a fortified outpost. Watchtowers were erected at key points around the perimeter, manned by volunteers keeping a constant lookout for trouble. Underground bunkers were expanded to house more people in case of another attack. Even the children pitched in, learning basic survival skills and helping with chores. Despite the changes, life went on. Farmers tended to their crops, teachers resumed classes, and families gathered for meals in the evenings. There was laughter again, though it was tinged with caution. Everyone knew the peace wouldn't last forever. Then, one fateful morning, the warning system Maria had built sprang to life. A loud siren echoed through the town, followed by a robotic voice announcing, "Incoming spacecraft detected. Estimated arrival. 10 minutes." Panic rippled through Willow Creek, but it was controlled panic. Thanks to the preparations, everyone knew exactly what to do. Families rushed to the bunkers while defenders took their positions. Daniel, Maria, and the others gathered in the tunnels, monitoring the situation on their screens. The approaching ship was smaller than the one that had attacked before, a scout vessel, likely sent to assess the damage and report back. Still, it posed a threat. Without hesitation, Daniel gave the order to launch the upgraded drones. This time they moved with unmatched speed and precision, intercepting the ship before it could reach the town. A fierce dogfight ensued, with the drones swarming the alien craft and peppering it with plasma fire. The Krylos pilot fought back, valiantly, launching countermeasures and attempting evasive maneuvers, but the drone's new AI algorithms predicted every move. Within minutes, the ship was disabled, spiraling out of control and crashing into the mountains beyond the town. Cheers erupted in the tunnels as the news spread. They had done it again. They had protected Willow Creek, but Daniel remained somber. "This isn't over," he reminded everyone. "That ship was just a scout. The main fleet will follow soon enough." No one argued with him. They all knew. He was right. The Krylos weren't known for forgiveness or mercy. Their defeat at Willow Creek was an insult they wouldn't tolerate. When they returned, it would be with overwhelming force. And yet, despite the looming threat, there was a sense of resolve among the townsfolk. They had faced impossible odds once and emerged victorious. They would do it again if they had to, because Willow Creek wasn't just a place, it was home, and they would defend it with everything they had. Far above, in the cold depths of space, the Krylos fleet plotted its next move. Commander Vrax knelt before his superiors awaiting judgment. His failure had been reported, and the Empire demanded answers. But instead of punishment, he received orders. Mobilize a full-scale invasion force. Willow Creek would pay for its defiance, not with destruction, but with domination. The message was clear. The Krylos were coming. And this time, they wouldn't lose. The days that followed the destruction of the Krylos scout ship were tense. Everyone in Willow Creek knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire retaliated. The townsfolk worked harder than ever, fortifying their defenses and preparing for the inevitable. Daniel Carter led the effort, his voice firm but calm as he gave instructions to anyone who would listen. "We've got one shot at this," he told them during a meeting in the town square. "If we hold strong, if we stay united, we can survive." But deep down, even Daniel wasn't sure they could pull it off. The Krylos fleet wouldn't send a handful of soldiers this time. They'd bring an army, ships bristling with weapons, troops trained to crush resistance and technology far beyond anything Willow Creek had managed to cobble together. Against such overwhelming odds, survival felt like a distant dream. Maria Lopez spent her days buried in wires and circuit boards, fine-tuning the drones and upgrading the EMP device. She barely slept, her mind racing with ideas on how to improve their chances. "If we can disable their ships before they land, we might stand a chance," she said to Daniel one evening as they reviewed schematics in the tunnels. "But it's risky. If it doesn't work—" "It will work," Daniel interrupted, though his tone lacked conviction. He didn't have the luxury of doubt, not now, not when so many lives depended on him. Laura Carter did what she could to keep morale high. She visited families in their homes, offering words of encouragement and checking on their supplies. "We've survived worse," she reminded them, though privately, she wondered if that was true. Still, her presence brought comfort, and the townsfolk drew strength from her optimism. Ethan Brooks and Jake Miller focused on reinforcing the perimeter defenses. They dug trenches, set up traps, and rigged old vehicles with explosives. "If they get past the drones, we'll make them regret it," Ethan said, patting a modified truck affectionately. It looked more like a junkyard project than a weapon, but it was better than nothing. Sarah Bennett continued training volunteers, pushing them harder than ever. "Accuracy matters," she told a group of nervous teenagers practicing with rifles. "Every shot counts. Don't waste ammo." Her stern demeanor softened occasionally, especially when she saw how much effort people were putting in. "You're doing great," she added with a small smile. "Just keep going." Despite their preparations, fear lingered in every corner of Willow Creek. At night, the streets were quiet except for the occasional patrol or the hum of generators powering the early warning system. People huddled in their homes, listening for the sound of alien engines in the sky. When the siren finally blared again, it came without warning, a shrill, piercing wail that sent everyone scrambling. "The fleet is here," Maria shouted into the radio, her voice trembling with urgency. On the monitors, dozens of red dots appeared, moving steadily toward Willow Creek. This wasn't a single ship. It was an invasion force. Daniel acted quickly. "Activate the EMP," he ordered. "Launch all drones, everyone to their positions." Above ground, chaos erupted as the Krylos fleet descended. Massive warships filled the sky, casting long shadows over the town. Dropships detached from the mothership, spilling out hundreds of soldiers armed to the teeth. Their armor gleamed under the sunlight, and their weapons crackled with energy. Unlike the last attack, there was no hesitation, no attempt to demand surrender. The Krylos had come to conquer, and they wasted no time doing it. The upgraded EMP surged to life, sending a wave of electromagnetic energy across the battlefield. For a brief moment, the Krylos systems faltered. Their shields flickered, their weapons sputtered, and their communication channels went silent. But unlike before, the effect didn't last. Within seconds, backup systems kicked in, restoring power to their gear. The aliens regrouped almost instantly, their discipline unshaken. "They're adapting," Maria yelled, frantically typing commands into her laptop. "I'm trying to recalibrate, but it's not enough." "Keep trying," Daniel replied, gripping his wrench tightly. He turned to Ethan. "Blow the water tower again, funnel them into the kill zones." Ethan nodded and sprinted toward the detonator. Moments later, the hillside shook as the explosives went off, collapsing the remains of the water tower onto the advancing Krylos soldiers. Dozens were crushed beneath the rubble, but the rest pushed forward, undeterred by the loss. The drones swarmed the invaders, firing plasma bolts with deadly precision. Thanks to Maria's upgrades, they were faster and smarter, weaving through the battlefield like streaks of light. Yet even they couldn't hold back the tide. The Krylos deployed anti-drone units equipped with specialized weaponry, systematically, disabling the machines one by one. Sarah and Jake unleashed hell from their positions near the tree line. The retrofitted turrets roared to life, spitting high explosive rounds at the enemy. Each blast tore through the Krylos ranks, scattering bodies and debris. But for every soldier they took down, 2 more seemed to take their place. The aliens advanced relentlessly, their sheer numbers overwhelming the defenders. In the tunnels, Laura monitored the situation, relaying updates to the team. "They're breaking through the northern flank," she reported. "Jake, Sarah, you need to fall back." "We can't," Sarah replied, her voice strained. "If we do, they'll overrun the clinic." "Then we hold the line," Jake said grimly, adjusting the angle of his turret. "No matter what." As the battle raged on, the townsfolk fought with everything they had. Farmers wielded pitchforks and shovels, mechanics hurled homemade grenades, and children carried messages between fighters. Even those too young or old to fight contributed, loading ammunition or tending to the wounded. It was a desperate, chaotic struggle, but it was also a testament to their unity and determination. Commander Vrax led the charge personally, his armor battered but functional. He barked orders to his troops, directing their movements with ruthless efficiency. His goal was clear: capture Willow Creek intact along with its inhabitants. The Empire wanted slaves, not ashes, and Vrax intended to deliver. But Willow Creek refused to yield. Every step the Krylos took was met with resistance. Every advance cost them dearly. Slowly but surely, the invaders began to realize that this tiny settlement was unlike anything they had faced before. These humans weren't just fighting, they were fighting together, and that made them dangerous. Back in the tunnels, Daniel watched the monitors with growing dread. The Krylos were closing in on the town center where the last of the defenders were making their stand. "Maria, how much longer until the EMP recharges?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. 2 minutes, Maria replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Maybe less. That's too long," Daniel muttered. Then, suddenly, an idea struck him. "Ethan, detonate the remaining charges. All of them." Ethan hesitated. "Are you sure? That'll level half the town." "I don't care about the town," Daniel snapped. "I care about the people. Do it." Ethan nodded and pressed the detonator. Explosions rocked Willow Creek, sending shockwaves through the air. Buildings collapsed, roads crumbled, and clouds of dust obscured the battlefield. The Krylos soldiers staggered, caught off guard by the sudden destruction. For a moment, the tide of the battle shifted slightly in favor of the defenders, but it wasn't enough. As the dust settled, the Krylos regrouped once more, their resolve unwavering. Commander Vrax surveyed the devastation, his expression hidden behind his helmet. Then, with a gesture, he signaled for his elite shock troopers to move in. These soldiers were different, larger, stronger, and equipped with experimental exosuits designed to withstand even the most intense attacks. "They're bringing out the big guns," Sarah reported, her voice tinged with panic. "We can't stop them." "Yes, we can," Daniel said firmly. Over the radio, he addressed everyone still standing. "Listen up. This is it. We've held them off this long, and we're not giving up now. Fight with everything you've got. For Willow Creek, for each other." His words sparked a final surge of defiance among the townsfolk. Exhausted but resolute, they poured all their remaining strength into the fight. Sarah and Jake fired until their turrets overheated, then switched to handheld weapons. Ethan hurled Molotov cocktails at the advancing shock troopers, while Maria remotely piloted the last surviving drone, guiding it straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Finally, the EMP recharged. "It's ready," Maria shouted. "Fire it." Daniel commanded. The second EMP pulse surged through the battlefield, stronger and wider than before. This time it hit the Krylos hard. Their exosuits seized up, their weapons failed, and their comms went dead. Even Commander Vrack stumbled, his armor locking up mid-step. For the first time, the invaders looked uncertain, vulnerable. Seizing the opportunity, the townsfolk launched a final desperate counterattack. Armed with whatever they could find, they charged at the immobilized Krylos, overwhelming them with sheer numbers and fury. It was messy, brutal, and chaotic. But it worked. When the dust cleared, the Krylos forces lay defeated. Their ships retreated into the sky, abandoning their commander and his surviving troops. Commander Vrack stood alone in the center of the ruined town, surrounded by defiant humans. For a moment, silence fell over the battlefield. Then, with a roar of frustration, Vrax activated a self-destruct sequence embedded in his armor. A bright flash engulfed him, leaving nothing behind but scorched earth. The battle was over. Willow Creek had won, again. The sun rose slowly over Willow Creek, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. The town was battered, bruised, and broken, but it still stood. Smoke curled into the air from smoldering ruins, and the ground was littered with debris, twisted, metal, shattered glass, and the remnants of alien armor. Yet amidst the destruction there was a quiet sense of triumph. The people of Willow Creek had faced an empire and survived. Daniel Carter walked through the wreckage, his boots crunching on the gravel-strewn streets. His body ached, and his hands were blistered from gripping tools and weapons for hours on end. But he didn't stop. There was too much to do. Too many questions to answer. What would happen next? How long before the Krylos returned? And could they really keep fighting like this forever? Laura joined him, her arms full of medical supplies. She had spent the night tending to the wounded, patching up cuts, setting broken bones, and comforting those who had lost loved ones. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, but she smiled faintly when she saw Daniel. "How's it looking?" she asked, nodding toward the horizon. "Not great," Daniel admitted. "But we're alive. That's something." "It's more than something," Laura said firmly. "It's everything." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained grim. He knew she was right. Surviving against all odds was no small feat. But survival wasn't enough, not if they wanted to protect their home in the long run. The Krylos Empire wouldn't forget this defeat. Next time they'd bring even greater forces. And next time, Willow Creek might not be so lucky. Maria Lopez emerged from the tunnels, her laptop tucked under one arm. She looked exhausted, her hair tied back in a messy bun, her glasses slightly crooked on her nose. "I've been analyzing the data from the battle," she said, holding up her device. "There's something you need to see." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Maria hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The EMP worked better than I expected. It fried most of their systems, even the backup ones. But that's not all. When Commander Vrax activated his self-destruct sequence, it sent out a signal." "A distress call?" "A distress call?" Laura repeated, frowning. "You mean they called for reinforcements?" "No," Maria replied. "This was different. It was encrypted, but I managed to decode part of it. It's a report to their superiors about us." Daniel's stomach sank. "What does it say?" "That we're dangerous," Maria said quietly. "That we shouldn't exist, and that we need to be dealt with immediately." A heavy silence fell over the group. They had known the Krylos wouldn't take this lying down, but hearing it confirmed made it feel real. The Empire saw them as a threat now, a problem to be eliminated. And they wouldn't stop until Willow Creek was wiped off the map. "We can't stay here," Ethan Brooks said, joining the conversation. He had been helping clear rubble near the clinic, his shirt stained with dirt and sweat. "They'll come back, stronger, faster. We won't survive another attack like that." "But where would we go?" Jake Miller asked, appearing behind him. "We don't have the resources to evacuate everyone, and even if we did, where would we go? The cities won't help us, no one will." "He's right," Daniel said, running a hand through his hair. "Running isn't an option, not unless we want to abandon everything we've built here." "Then what do we do?" Sarah Bennett asked, stepping forward. Her rifle was slung over her shoulder, and her face was streaked with soot. Just wait for them to come back and kill us? No, Daniel replied firmly. We fight, but not the way we did before. We need a new plan. Something bigger, something smarter. What are you thinking? Laura asked, studying his face. Daniel took a deep breath. We reach out, to other settlements, to anyone who will listen. If we can warn them about the Krylos, maybe they'll start preparing too. Maybe we can form alliances, build networks, share resources. And if they don't believe us, Maria asked. Then we show them, Daniel said. We've got proof, the wreckage, the tech, the recordings. They'll have to believe us. Once they see it, the others exchanged glances, considering the idea. It was risky. Reaching out meant exposing themselves, making themselves vulnerable, but staying silent meant waiting for the inevitable and losing everything. All right, Ethan said finally. Let's do it. But we'll need to move fast. Over the next few days, the townsfolk worked tirelessly to implement Daniel's plan. They salvaged parts from the destroyed Krylos ships and weapons, using them to create evidence of the invasion. Maria programmed drones to carry messages to nearby settlements, while Sarah and Jake led scouting parties to establish contact with neighboring communities. At first, the response was mixed. Some settlements dismissed Willow Creek's warnings as paranoia or exaggeration. Others were intrigued but hesitant to act. But slowly, word began to spread. Stories of the tiny town that had stood up to the Krylos Empire traveled far and wide, inspiring others to prepare for the worst. Farmers fortified their barns, mechanics converted old vehicles into makeshift tanks, and teachers trained students in basic survival skills. In Willow Creek itself, life began to change. The townsfolk rebuilt what they could, turning their homes into bunkers and their fields into defensive zones. Watchtowers sprouted along the perimeter, manned by volunteers keeping constant vigil. Underground tunnels were expanded to house more people, and traps were set at key points around the town. But perhaps the biggest change was in the people themselves. They had started as ordinary farmers, mechanics, and shopkeepers, content to live quiet lives in obscurity. Now they were warriors, defenders, survivors, and they were determined to protect their home, no matter the cost. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel stood on the edge of town, staring at the stars. Laura joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But I know one thing. We're stronger together. Stronger than anyone gives us credit for." Laura smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That's true. And as long as we stick together, we've got a chance." Behind them, the town buzzed with activity. People laughed, argued, and worked side by side, their bond stronger than ever. They weren't just neighbors anymore, they were family. And they would do whatever it took to keep each other safe. Far above, in the cold depths of space, the Krylos fleet plotted its next move. The Empire had taken notice of Willow Creek, and it was not pleased. Retaliation was coming, bigger, bolder, and deadlier than before. But for now, the stars remained silent, watching and waiting. Willow Creek had proven itself a formidable opponent, but the galaxy was vast, and humanity was small. The battle might have ended, but the war was just beginning. And somewhere in the darkness, plans were being made. Plans that would test the limits of courage, resilience, and hope. But for now, beneath the endless expanse of stars, Willow Creek stood tall. Broken, yes, but unbroken, ready to face whatever came next.